welcome back to Top 10 History. And today we are going to be going over the top 10 important historical events that changed the world.
Number 10, the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution started in 1790 and ended in 1870. The Industrial Revolution saw the increased volume and manufacturing of goods. It also improved the standards of living for some people. Also saw new labor laws like child labor laws and a new poor law, which established new workhouses for the impoverished. The reason it's placed at 10th is because the cons outweigh the goods. These cons include terrible working conditions and the abuse of children. And I can't forget to mention the factory owners would exploit the children so they would make more money. They would even have children who weren't even old enough to go to elementary school work for them. That is why it's ranked at 10. Number 9, the Renaissance. The Renaissance started in the 14th century and ended in the 17th century. It started off in Italy because Italy had good landscapes, artists were inspired by the Italian ruins, and the independent states of Italy were very, very wealthy. The Medici family were one of the main families to support the start of the Renaissance. The Medici family are known as the godfathers of the Renaissance. They would pay artists for their sculptures, which would allow the artists to focus on their work without having to worry about money. The Medici family also supported the people who the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were named after: Donatello, Leonardo, Raphael, and Michelangelo. It is ranked at number 9 because it saw many great pieces of artistry be created, but compared to the others ahead of it, it does not deserve to be ranked higher. Number 8, the Russian Revolution. The Russian Revolution occurred in 1917, but the events that led up to the Russian Revolution started in 1905. The first event was Bloody Sunday. A bunch of citizens were protesting outside the Tsar's Winter Palace, and the Russian military was present during the protests, and for some reason, they decided to shoot into the crowd. Hundreds were killed and injured. The Tsar's response to Bloody Sunday was that he create a constitution and a parliament. This response was so that the people would keep Tsar Nicholas II in power. The next event that drove the people to want the Tsar to lose his power was during World War I. During World War I, the Tsar took control over the Russian military, which resulted in terrible losses for the Russians. The Russian casualties were greater than any other nation, and because the Tsar made the farmers sign up for the war, all of Russia was in a food shortage. Russia was also suffering under a severe inflation because before the war, Russia was a pretty poor country, so the war did not help out the Russians' economy. Let me introduce you to the driving force behind the revolution: Vladimir Lenin. Lenin was exiled by the Tsar, but in 1917 he came back to Russia to start the revolution. Lenin and Trotsky, his right-hand man, took the city of Petrograd and put the Tsar and his family under house arrest. With the Tsar gone, the people elected Vladimir Lenin. They instantly signed a treaty to end World War I so they could focus on the food shortages and falling economy in Russia. This is ranked at 8th because it was the end of the Russian kings being called Tsars. It was also the start of communism. Number 7, the fall of Constantinople. The fall of Constantinople happened in 1453. Constantinople was the last city under Byzantine rule. The fall of Constantinople led to the extinction of the Byzantine Empire and the reign of the Ottoman Empire. This would have never happened if the powers in Christendom just sent troops to help Constantinople in the upcoming siege, like Byzantine Emperor Constantine XI asked. Because Constantinople was receiving no help from the Christendom, the citizens started to riot. Constantinople received troops from Venetia and Genoa. Genoa also sent Giovanni Longo, who the emperor appointed as the commander of the land defenses. The Constantinople army was severely outmatched by the Ottoman army. Constantinople had 37,000 troops, the Ottomans 80,000 troops. During the siege, Giovanni was mortally wounded, causing the Constantinople troops to be demoralized and not really sure on what they should do next. Many of the troops abandoned ship, and I'm sure it did not help that their emperor was killed in battle. After Constantinople fell, Christendom powers relied on Hungary to stop the expansion of the Ottomans. This is ranked at 7th because it was the end of the Byzantine Empire and was the beginning of the reign of the Ottomans. It also disrupted trade routes between the powers of Europe and Asia. It also saw the rise of Islam. Number 6, the discoveries of Columbus. The discoveries of Columbus are incredibly important to the history of the world. The sails started in 1492, and Columbus's first voyage resulted in the discovery of what we now know as America. He discovered some other places while on other voyages, like Guadalupe and the Jamaica Islands on his second voyage, Venezuela on his third voyage, and on his fourth voyage he sailed the coast of Central America. This is at number 6 because it was very important that America was discovered, or else the world would be very different if Columbus never landed on it. Number 5, the Napoleonic Wars. The Napoleonic Wars happened from 1803 to 1815. It saw the rise and fall of the French Empire and happened after the French Revolution. It was the French Empire versus the European powers. Because it was right after the Revolution, Napoleon badly needed money to finance the war, so he sold his land in America, which would then turn out to be known as the Louisiana Purchase. Napoleon was a very smart leader. At one point in the war, Austria and Russia go to attack Italy, which France controls. So what does Napoleon do? He counterattacks and takes the Austrian capital, forcing the Austrian and Russian troops to come back to Austria to fight the French troops. The Russian and Austrian troops heavily outmassed Napoleon's troops, but Napoleon won the fight through his smart tactics. This is known as his greatest victory. The defeat of the Austrians and the Russians forced Austria to surrender. The French could not defeat the British at sea, as proven during the Battle of Trafalgar. The French lost 19 ships out of the 20 ships during the Battle of Trafalgar. So what did the French do? Well, the French decided to cripple Britain's economy by stopping countries from trading with them and sinking their cargo ships. This is ranked 5th because Napoleon was a very smart leader and came up with some great tactics and laws. His little tactic of blocking countries from trading and receiving goods were used in World War I and World War II. He also created laws during the war that the French still use to this day. Number 4, the French Revolution. The French Revolution occurred in 1789 and ended in 1799. The main reason the revolution started was due to how incompetent the French king was. King Louis XVI was a terrible king. The French had a crumbling economy due to them financing the American Revolution. So King Louis XVI tried to fix the problem by himself, but he ended up making it worse. He called a meeting with the Estates Generals so together they could solve the economic issues, but the Estates Generals wanted a constitutional monarchy like the English, but King Louis XVI wanted to stay in power. The third meeting was cancelled. They blamed the king, so they went to a tennis court and they wrote the tennis court oath. They declared themselves as the National Assembly. They came up with a constitution that emphasized the rights of the people. The king gave in to this constitution temporarily, but refused to reform. The bread riots then happened because peasants could not afford bread, so they rioted until the bakers dropped the price of bread. Then King Louis XVI hired mercenaries to surround Paris. Their main goal was to crush the National Assembly. Many citizens were afraid and they knew the Bastille had weapons, so they asked if they could have some, but the guards started to shoot at them. As this began, the citizens stormed to the Bastille. After this event, the National Assembly made a declaration of the rights of man and citizens. The king refused to accept the declaration, so they made up a constitution that said Frenchmen could vote for the people in the constitutional monarchy. This constitution made the king have limited power, so he tried to flee to Austria with his family, but was caught. They executed King Louis XVI, and that was the end of the French Revolution. This is ranked at 4th because it started the trend of revolutions. It gave power to the people and let them vote. Also gave basic human rights to people. Number 3, the American Revolution. The American Revolution started in 1775 and ended in 1783. American colonies wanted independence over the British, but the British did not want that, so they went to war. Later in the war, the French and Spain would join America's side. It started in Boston when the Americans threw tea into the Boston Harbor due to the amount of taxes they had to pay. The British did not like that, so they taxed the Americans even more. The Americans started to steal things from the British, and that is when the fighting started. After learning that the British were going to secure a weapon cache at Fort Williams, the Americans sent Paul Revere to issue a warning to the locals. That same day, hundreds of men stormed the fort and captured the British, taking their weapons and cannons. In 1775, the war officially kicked off. Britain sent a small army to Massachusetts to arrest and imprison American citizens. Paul Revere rode from Concord to Lexington to warn the citizens to secure their stores before it was captured by the British. George Washington, who later became the first president of the United States, was elected as the commander of the colonies. He would face the British generals, Sir William Howe, Sir Henry Clinton, John Burgoyne, and Charles Cornwallis. For the next 8 years, many battles occurred, like the Battle of New York, where the British won and forced the Americans to fall back, or the Battle of Princeton, where the Americans defeated the British. Over these many battles, the British generals were getting defeated and were forced to surrender, like Burgoyne during the Battle of Saratoga, or Cornwallis during the Battle of Yorktown. The war ended in 1783 when the British signed a treaty with the Americans, and the British recognized the independence of the United States. This is ranked 3rd because if the Americans did not defeat the British, America would still be under British control and would have changed the entire demographic of America. Number 2, the American Civil War. The American Civil War happened from 1861 to 1865. It happened once Lincoln was selected as president. He wanted to abolish the use of slaves, but southern states refused to get rid of their slaves, so a war broke out. The northern states became the Union, while the southern states became the Confederates. The Confederacy consisted of South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas, Virginia, Arkansas, Tennessee, and North Carolina. Many great generals fought in this war, such as Irvin McDowell, Thomas Stonewall Jackson, George Meade, George Pickett, Robert Lee, and William T. Sherman. Many battles happened between these great generals, but none are more important than the two I will be talking about. The Battle of Gettysburg is the most famous battle of the Civil War. General Robert Lee of the Confederacy invaded Union soil, hoping to reach D.C. so they could end the war. Major General George Meade fought for the Union Army, and they battled in the most fateful battle in the entire Civil War. Lee, no matter what he did, could not break the Union ranks. Confederate General George Pickett led 2 brigades in an assault onto the Union position after they were shelled with artillery for 2 hours. This was a terrible decision, as 60% of the Confederate troops were killed, causing Lee to retreat. The other battle would be the Battle of Atlanta. A trio of Union armies led by General William T. Sherman converged upon Atlanta, where they were met outside the city by a desperate Confederate army, counterattack that failed. They surrounded the city, seizing it for the entire month of August. Eventually, the Confederate forces gave up the city, leaving it in the hands of the Union. The capture of Atlanta crippled the Confederacy war effort. This is when the Confederates lost the war. What also did not help was the Emancipation Proclamation. Lincoln, now in his second term as president, declared a proclamation that stated that slaves are now free everywhere. The slaves in the Confederacy started leaving and joining Union's side, which resulted in weapons for the Confederacy to be less produced. This is ranked second because the war was to end all slavery, and that was very important as slavery was a terrible thing and incredibly racist. Number 1. The assassination of Franz Ferdinand. I believe we all know why the assassination of Franz Ferdinand is number 1. His death directly caused World War I. He was the Archduke of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Ferdinand and his wife Sophie were assassinated on June 28, 1914 in Sarajevo, the capital of the Austro-Hungarian province of Bosnia. The assassin was Gavrilo Princip, a member of the Black Hand. The Black Hand was a Serbian nationalist organization that existed in the early part of the 20th century. They were opposed to Austro-Hungarian influence in the Balkans, so they decided to kill the Archduke of Austro-Hungary as a form of protest. Austro-Hungary was furious, so they declared war on Serbia with the help of Germany. Within days, Germany also declared war on Russia, Serbia's ally, and invaded France via Belgium, which then caused the UK to declare war on Germany. Therefore, Franz Ferdinand's assassination directly caused World War I, and that's why he's ranked number 1. And that's it for the video. Please subscribe and click that notification bell. Thank you for watching and have a great day.